Welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case episode 4 of my Star Trek, the original series episode breakdown video series. In this video, I'll be looking at Season 1 episodes 18 to 23 of Star Trek, the original series, or generation, to identify historical references which can be used to determine the original history of the Star Trek universe. The episode order I'm using is the production order. In order to understand the development of the history of or vision of Star Trek, we need to study the episodes in the order they were written. While I'm uncertain of the exact writing order, the production order is about as close as I can confirm. The episode order information as broadcast is also included. Special thanks to the transcripts which can be found on the Chakotay site. When Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek back in 1966, he had a vision which remained basically consistent over the following 3 years. The animated series and early movies retained this consistency in the most part. When The Next Generation was released in 1987, Gene's vision had changed and the past needed to change in order to be consistent with his new vision. This video series will look at the original vision of Star Trek, starting with the earliest source material. Any historical facts from later sources which contradict the earlier references must be assumed to be in error. Minor changes in nomenclature can be excused. The Squire of Gothos is the 17th episode of the first season. It was the 18th episode produced. Another colony planet is mentioned, called Colony Beta 6. No details are provided about the colony planet, apart from the fact it needs supplies, and it's on the other side of some form of void. The Earth is 900 light years away, which is confirmed later. Because Spock is surprised the planet was not identified earlier, there must be some traffic in this part of space. The conclusion is Colony Beta 6 is further away from Earth and a space void needs to be crossed in order to reach it. This means the Federation could be a sphere 900 light years or more in size. This makes the Federation a lot larger than previously estimated and may not be correct. The Enterprise finds an uncharted planet in the middle of the void, which is called Gothos. It is an artificial planet created by some type of superior energy being called Trelane. Trelane views Earth from 900 light years away, thus sees Earth 900 years ago. He mentions Napoleon, who was at his peak about 1805. This makes it 2805, which cannot be correct. If it is 2264, then Trelane is viewing Earth during the year 1364, which is in the Middle Ages. I suspect an error has been made and the distance is actually about 460 light years away, which would allow Napoleon to be mentioned. If this is correct, the size of the Federation is about the size I earlier estimated, which is 300 to 400 light years radius with Earth in the centre. On the other hand, we do have another reference to the 900 light year away theory, where Kirk mentions deserts are 900 light years away. I'm uncertain what to think in this case. My gut feel is to just say it's 460 light years away, and the earlier desert comment could be about a specific desert planet on the other side of Federation space. Trelane calls humans a predator species which preys on itself. This is apparently rare. Thinking about it, there are few examples of non-human races fighting themselves in the original series. If this is correct, it makes humans a rather vicious race. The crew of the Enterprise is 400, less the crew on the planet. In shore leave it was 430 or 431. This episode mentions a Space Fleet command. This may be an early version of Starfleet. This is the second mention of a military command organisation. Trelane and his parents represent some type of pure mentality. Perhaps they are the Q. In this episode, it's implied the Federation may be a sphere 900 light years or more in all directions from Earth. This makes it larger than I earlier estimated. This could mean that it could be over 3.2 billion square light years in size, if this is correct. Personally, I feel the size is much smaller. 460 light year radius with Earth in the centre makes more sense and aligns with Trelane viewing Napoleon. Memory Alpha states there are 700 colony planets in the Federation. So far, every colony planet is inhabited by humans. We know there are a large number of non-colonies. For example, Mars is a non-colony, which has, in turn, colonies of its own. Most of these planets are also human-inhabited. In The Next Generation, there is a statement there are 150 planets in the Federation in 2063. As this was 2 years after the Federation was founded and Earth managed to fight the Romulans to a standstill, the bulk of these planets were probably human planets. If this is not the case, then the Federation would be a superpower that could easily defeat the Romulans or Klingons, and the Federation would not be as cautious about the neutral zone, simply because the Earth component was very powerful. If all the other alien components were equally as powerful, we would end up with an enormously powerful Federation, which does not exist. Irrespective of the actual size of the sphere, which is the Federation, if this is all correct, the density of inhabited planets is very low, with the planets being separated by an average of about 150 light years. There is a high probability that Alpha Centauri consists of 5 colony planets, so the value of 700 colony planets may mean colony systems. Otherwise, the density would even be lower and the distances between inhabited planets even greater. At 400 times light speed, it would take 4 to 5 months to travel between an average planet or system. If we assume that 900 light years to Beta 6 is the furthest point in the Federation, which could be the case considering a starship is being used to provide supplies, the actual Federation is a lot smaller and the distances between planets are a little bit more reasonable distance, but still we need to consider the actual logistics of a Federation of a particular size. Another interesting statement from the Next Generation was the Federation spanned 8,000 light years, which seems simply too large. The galaxy is only 1,000 light years deep, so assuming this means 8,000 by 8,000 by 1,000, we end up with an area of 640 billion light years square, with distances between systems being an average of 400 light years, which is 1 year at warp factor 1. I think the latter reference is simply wrong. As I indicated earlier, I personally feel the actual size of the Federation is about 450 light years in all directions from Earth. Colony Beta 6 could be some far-flung outpost beyond a void, which requires a starship to provide it with supplies. Thus, this planet represents some form of unusual outpost. If this is correct, the distances between inhabited planets become significantly more reasonable, but still significant. The other possible theory is the 900 light-year distance from Earth is actually half the distance of 450 light-years, in order for Trelane to be viewing an Earth with Napoleon in it. If Trelane has a bust of Napoleon, he cannot be further than 450 light-years away. The final point is Trelane looks like he comes from the Q. Arena is the 18th episode of the first season. It was the 19th episode produced. Cestus 3 is a small colony or outpost on the edge of Federation space. It apparently is within the territory of another race, the Gorn. Within the episode, we discover there's something called disruptors, which are more powerful than hand phasers. Within this episode, we get our first mention and use of photon torpedoes, although we never see them. The torpedoes need to be armed and can be fired by banks. The colony of Cestus 3 seems to be well armed. It has an arsenal, which has a grenade launcher, which appears to fire nuclear warhead, and phaser batteries. The alien ship in this episode, which we later learn is a Gorn ship, can travel up to warp 7. The Enterprise can, for short distances, travel at warp 8, although this is dangerous. This is the only view of a Gorn ship we get in the episode. On the right is an estimate of what they looked like in more detail. Within the episode, the Enterprise and Gorn ship, just before they are stopped by an alien entity, are beyond the Federation charts. In this case, 22.3 parsecs, which is 72 light years away. As the Enterprise can probably cover this distance in about 28 days, I have to assume the colony world must be well beyond known space. We learn in the episode that a sustained warp 7 is dangerous and can cause the engines or ship to blow up. The Enterprise goes to warp 8, which I assume is even more dangerous. We learn about some type of positioning system. I have no idea what it means, but must provide a three-dimensional coordinate using some common reference points, perhaps the Earth. We are introduced to an advanced race in the episode which occupies a single planet called the Metrons. The Gorn probably moved in a direction away from their home system to ensure the Federation would not find their home planet, so this may be in generally unknown space. The Metrons live at least 1,500 Earth years and probably only occupy one planet. In this case, the Metron which shows itself was born in 764 AD. The Metrons prepared a planet with suitable atmosphere, however we have no idea where this planet is. Kirk calls this planet an asteroid. A new advanced alien race is introduced, the Gorn, apart of course from the Metrons. They are reptilian and have technology equivalent to that of the Federation. Physically strong, they are slow. Very little additional information is provided apart from the Gorn being in the area of space which is unexplored and uncharted by the Federation. The Federation and photon torpedoes are mentioned for the first time in this episode. We are introduced to two new alien races, the Gorn, who are at a similar technological level to the Federation, and the Metrons, who are at least 1,000 years more advanced, if not a lot more. Gorn technology is beyond the edge of Federation space, so must be well away from the Klingons and Romulans, perhaps on the other side of Federation space. We are shown another Federation colony in the episode which consists of women and children, but which is also armed. Obviously the Federation must contend with some alien or illegal violence. As this is based on a Western, this represents some frontier town, with the Gorn representing natives perhaps. The final interesting piece of information is Warp 7 cannot be maintained for any period of time and Warp 8 is very dangerous. Prior to this, the fastest speed mentioned is Warp Factor 7, so Warp 8 may represent 1,100 times the speed of light, or even more, if my Warp Factor guesses are correct. The alternative factor is the 27th episode of the first season. It was the 20th episode produced. In this episode, the Enterprise surveys an unnamed planet which in an alternate universe houses a civilization, perhaps. The episode mentions a starbase 200. This could imply there are at least 200 starbases, which seems like a rather high number. The Enterprise must have faster-than-light communication, as the general alert from Starbase comes in immediately after the disturbance occurs. After the disturbance occurred, which was caused by time travel, Starfleet assumes this is a prelude to an invasion. Clearly the universe of Star Trek, at least in this period, is not a nice peaceful universe. The Federation decides to clear 100 parsecs, or 326 light years, around the Enterprise. This probably implies the Enterprise must be 300 light years beyond the closest Federation planet. This is a significant distance and implies the Enterprise is roaming well beyond Federation space. The episode postulates an alternative universe, which in this case is made up of antimatter. Time travel is also a factor in this episode. This makes for an interesting episode, but is not significant in terms of the history of the Star Trek universe. The only significant point is the time travelers are travelling from the distant past, so represents a civilization which existed well before civilization ever occurred on Earth. The key takeaways from this episode is that we are made aware of a civilization which existed on this uninhabited planet long ago, but which destroyed itself. There appears to be no physical evidence of its existence, so it must have occurred a long time ago. Starfleet can communicate with its far-flung starships using faster-than-light communication, possibly even instantaneous communication. This is possible if we use maybe quantum mechanics, where atoms are theoretically locked together. If this was the case, the Enterprise could always communicate with Starfleet in all cases, which is not the case in many episodes. Thus, the technology is unknown. We are also told of a Starbase 200, which may imply a total of 200 starbases, as the number of planets could not exceed 1,000. This seems excessive. Perhaps this should actually be Starbase 20. Later, I basically come to the conclusion that 200 starbases is a reasonable number. Tomorrow is Yesterday is the 19th episode of the first season. It was the 21st episode produced. The episode mentions a Starbase 9. This is the third starbase we have identified. The Enterprise is affected by what's called the black sum. Obviously, this is a black hole. When this episode was created, black holes weren't commonly known about. Within the episode, the Enterprise uses the tractor beam, I suspect for the first time in the series. We also get Kirk's name confirmed for a second time. The name is confirmed as James T. Kirk. We still don't know what T stands for. We discover in the episode there are 12 Enterprise ships in the fleet. While not definitive, this does seem to indicate the Enterprise is what would be considered a capital ship. The Enterprise is part of a combined military organisation called United Earth Space Probe Agency. While the Federation has been mentioned, as well as Starfleet, perhaps each member has its own fleet. Thus the Earth, probably the major member of the Federation, has its own fleet. As we never really see any alien-style Federation ships, it's likely that the Earth or human part of the Federation represents the overwhelming part of the military power of the Federation, as well as other aspects of the Federation. The Vulcans are an issue, as you would expect them to be more advanced than Earth. We know later in the series a starship like the Enterprise is crewed exclusively by Vulcans. While unlikely, could the humans be the main builders and maintainers of the combat fleet? Possible. The Enterprise received major repairs at Cygnet 14, which is a planet dominated by women. This is probably not a colony planet and must have sufficient industrial and technological capacity to repair the Enterprise. Obviously, it's a Federation planet, and most likely a human one at that, as only a human would program the computer in the manner they did. We discover that there was an Earth-Saturn probe, which was captained by Colonel Sean Jeffrey Christopher. As it's currently 1969 and the captain may have his child by 1969 at the earliest, the mission probably occurred about 2009. This, if anything, proves the universe of Star Trek is not our universe that we currently live in. Another interesting point is by the time a manned Earth-Saturn probe was launched, it would seem logical that manned missions to Mars and Jupiter would have already occurred. Bases on the Moon and Mars is equally possible. In this universe, the Earth is rapidly moving out into space, unlike in our universe. The most significant point about the episode is there is a United Earth which runs, or has, 12 Enterprise-like capital ships under what is called the United Earth Space Probe Agency. This is mentioned in Charlie X and has the abbreviations of UESPA. Originally, I suspected this was simply a precursor to Starfleet, but Starfleet is mentioned in this episode as well. What does this mean? If Starfleet is under the United Earth Space Probe Agency, then the Federation must be controlled and dominated by Earth. While this is possible for independent human planets, this must also apply to the Vulcans, for example. We know the Vulcans crew a ship like the Enterprise. Presumably, it's one of the 12 capital ships. The way it's looking, at least at this point after viewing these episodes, is the Earth-Romulan War unified all the human planets, in the same manner the Franco-Prussian War unified all the German states under Prussia. After the war, the Federation was formed, again like Germany. Germany, or Deutschland, basically means land of the Deutsch, and it was a federation. If the Federation is similar to the German Federation, then we are looking at a very different view of the Federation that we may have had originally. The German Empire, which was a federation of states, did contain non-German areas. This was mainly Polish and French, but they were minor parts, and there was an attempt to maintain their local language and customs. The initial Star Trek universe federation could have been the same, with non-humans slowly joining for economic and military benefits. If this was the case, historically the military could well be under the authority of something called United Earth Space Probe Agency. The Return of the Archons is the 21st episode of the first season. It was the 22nd episode produced. The Federation sent a starship to this planet, mentioned in the episode 100 years ago, assumed that this was in 2164, which was after the Earth-Romulan War. While this episode does not specifically state the ship was an Earth ship, it's reasonable to assume as it was the Federation which was tracing what happened to it. The Archons obviously landed on the planet and were absorbed. That is, the Archon is the ship, and the crew were what was absorbed, which implies the inhabitants were human. This is unlikely, but there may have been human enough to look the same, but not to interbreed with the indigenous people on the planet. This means part of the population of the planet is human. If we assume the starship had a crew half that of the Enterprise, and more of the crew was absorbed than killed, that leaves us with a population of, let's say, 108. After 100 years, this could have grown to a population of over 3,000 humans, if not more. The planet where the Archon was lost was called Beta 3 in the star system s1e11. This would be classed as an alien Federation planet, but with a population which partially consists of humans, and the rest were so close as to be indistinguishable. In the episode, the Enterprise is hit with a heat beam, which can be negated by the shields, but the Enterprise is unable to use warp or impulse to escape. This makes no sense and is obviously a plot mechanism only. We discover in the episode Beta 3 was racked by war 6,000 years ago, and when an engineer called Landru re-engineered society so it would remain static at a low technological level. Later, Landru programmed the computer as himself, and the computer continued the society. Based on the technology of the computer, Landru, the technology level of the planet was as high as the Federation 6,000 years ago. Perhaps it only lacked space travel, but otherwise technologically was comparatively similar. The war, or when the society, or 6,000 years ago, would have made it 3,736 BC. The key takeaway from this is, after the end of the Earth-Romulan War and the formation of the Federation was sending exploratory ships far away. A reasonable guess is the Federation doubled in size in the last 100 years, and Beta 3 was still outside normal Federation space. This makes it over 400 light-years from Earth and possibly up to 100 light-years away from the closest Federation planet. This could be why it took the Federation 100 years to go looking for it, which means the Federation was sending exploration ships at least 300 light-years from the Federation border 100 years ago. The planet must be in a direction where there are no Klingons or Romulans. The other interesting point is that there was a high technological civilization on this planet 6,000 years ago when it almost collapsed due to a major war. This would occur about 3764 BC, which is a long time ago. The inhabitants were in some ways compatible with humans. As Landru absorbed the humans, this must be a fact rather than an attempt to save money by not using makeup. Perhaps this planet did have space travel and visited Earth before 3764 BC, which may be an interesting story to tell. Could these be ancient aliens? I must immediately contact the History Channel. A Taste of Armageddon is the 23rd episode of the first season. It was the 23rd episode produced. We discover in this episode MNR7, which is an alien planet, which is not part of the Federation. It has a high technological level, but possibly lacks interstellar space capability, although it has space travel within its system. It has had space travel capability for several hundred years. We later learn they must have had space travel for at least 500 years, and probably more, likely 700 years ago. This means they had space capability about 1550 AD, or at the very latest 1750 AD. The Federation sent the starship SS Valiant to MNR 50 years ago, or in 2214. We later discover it was destroyed. A gap of 50 years seems to imply MNR7 is well beyond the borders of the Federation. In the episode, the Enterprise represents the United Federation of Planets, which is the first time this term is used. While the Federation has been used before, this must be its full name. No mention of the United Earth Space Probe Agency, although that is the name of the combined service rather than the political entity, so could be excused or could be understood. We discover that the third planet in this system is also inhabited. It was colonized by MNR7, became independent, and has engaged in war with MNR7 for 500 years. For Vendikar to be a threat, its colonization must have begun 100 or 200 years prior to this. We discover the Vulcans have some telepathic capacity over distance. This is the first time we discover Spock can influence minds this way. We discover the MNR, or that MNR7 military uses disruptors, which is the same weapon type the Gorn used. In the episode, the Enterprise is called a Star Cruiser. This could be the name given to capital ships, but could be a specific term only the local civilization uses as well. We discover in the episode that if the screens, or most likely shields, are active, phasers cannot be fired through it, but photon torpedoes can. I assume they can be fired well away from the ship to its rear and then can turn around and hit their targets accordingly. For the second time, we learn the Federation has penal colonies, which can be used for military staff disobeying orders, as well as for violent crime. Seems a little bit harsh. We discover the Enterprise has the capability of destroying a civilization on an entire planet. After dealing with MNR7 and dropping off the Federation ambassadors, the Enterprise now heads off to another planet, in this case Aragon 2. It's likely the Enterprise is returning to a major planet after this expedition, as this was a high-profile diplomatic mission which required picking up Federation ambassadors from military or major planet, most likely also a Federation member. It's possible this could have been an alien planet, but the ambassador and staff were not aliens, so it does imply it's a human-populated planet more than an alien planet. As a result, we have to assume both the source of the Enterprise, where the ambassadors were picked up, and where we're going to, Aragon 2, are most likely Federation planets, which are significantly or reasonably well populated and most likely by humans. Key takeaway from the episode is we discover yet another alien civilization, which had space travel 500 to 700 years ago. They did not expand beyond their system. This is in stark contrast with the humans, who commonly sent exploration ships 400 light years from the closest friendly planet. This occurred even before warp was developed and continued under the Federation. Humans tended to be a bit different to most of the alien races we come across in Star Trek, with maybe the exception of the Klingons and Romulans. We also discover the SS Valiant, another starship, was destroyed trying to establish relations with MNR7 50 years previously. As it took the Federation 50 years to find out what happened, this planet must be a reasonable distance away. 50 years ago it may have been 100 to 200 light years away from the closest Federation planet. Yet the Federation wants to establish diplomatic relations with a planet that far away. Another example of the aggressive expansionary drive of humans or Federation. You could blame the Earth-Romulan War on this, but the humans were just as expansionary before the war. I would expect both planets eventually join the Federation, that's both planets in this system, Venticat and MNR7, but I suspect this will not be soon. Many of the latter Star Trek movies and shows do not align with the original vision of the series. This is common in real history, as later historians attempt to change the past to justify their beliefs in the present. As I personally enjoyed the original vision of Star Trek, I would hope future material, shows and movies, would go back to its original roots. However, I seriously doubt that. This concludes episode 4 of my Star Trek, the original series episode breakdown video series, in this case covering season 1, episodes 18 to 23. Alle guten Dingen, kommen zu einem Ende.